Yes, it's 3 minutes after 11 a.m. in the Pacific time zone, 3 minutes after 2 in the East Coast. Yes, it is indeed Biden time. Welcome. I'm Christian Bladt, as always, joined by our friend Scott Moore.
Hey everyone, it's good to be here.
I like the two-handed wave. I think that just shows just how friendly you are. And very excited to have back our friend Royal Oakes. Royal, thank you for being here again today.
Hey, my pleasure, Christian. Should I do like jazz hands?
Yeah, I think we could all do a jazz hands, and then we can create a TikTok basically of us doing it, and we'll go from there, and then that'll be the viral demand that we need.
Christian,
So
I have to say, Christian, before you start,
yeah,
I've seen that some audiences at East Coast colleges are told do not clap because some people have an anxiety disorder that makes them unhappy if they hear loud noise, and so they're told to do the jazz hands if they like something. So maybe that's a trend.
wow. All right. Well, during the course of the show, if I
Okay.
see either of you doing jazz hands, I will take it as though it were a standing ovation. That is good to know. So we haven't done the show in a few weeks, mostly because I was figuring that our next show was going to be our Supreme Court confirmation special. And honestly, up until yesterday morning, I thought that I was going to have to punt this one more time to next week. I was surprised to see that it happened. I was surprised that anything can get done in Washington this day and age. And as we'll see when we go over the numbers, it just barely got done, but it did get done. So I want to talk a little bit about it, just sort of from the makeup of the Supreme Court. Obviously, you're not really justice elect. You're justice to be Kentanji Jackson Brown is but once she is there and you take a look at the Supreme Court, Royal, the composition of the Supreme Court, you will literally not be able to say, oh, it's just a bunch of old white guys, because there will not be that many old white guys on it anymore, will there?
Well, that's right. And of course, people have commented on the fact that really it's not going to change the ideological makeup of the court because she's replacing Justice Breyer, and he was liberal, she's liberal. So, but the important thing is, of course, she's early 50s, 53 maybe. He was in early 80s maybe. And so just as Clarence Thomas going on the court in 1991 as a relatively young man had decades and he's still there, she's got decades ahead of her. And so in that sense, it's a victory for Biden, for progressives, and obviously landmark the first Black female justice of the Supreme Court. So although it's not really going to change things in terms of the vote in the near term, Republicans wanted to focus during the confirmation hearing on, well, is she too progressive? What about these pedophile cases where she didn't lock him up and throw away the key? And basically, it was a platform for Cruz and Lindsey Graham to kind of look ahead to the midterms to try to score some political points, knowing in their minds that almost certainly, unless there's some weird smoking gun piece of evidence that emerges, that she would survive and get confirmed.
Right, exactly. And we'll talk about the confirmation process and some of the things that we're focused on. I know when she spoke earlier today, Justice to be Jackson referenced the fact that she had 95 meetings with 97 different senators.
Wow.
So yeah,
now that's cruel and unusual punishment.
I know. I can't imagine just having to watch like 30-second sound bites from 97 sitting senators. But she actually had to have conversations with all of them. Scott, let's sort of talk about it from the historic standpoint. This kind of representation on the Supreme Court means compared to where it was, say, 40 years ago.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, to Roy's point, it doesn't change the day-to-day makeup of the court, but as something that young girls and young women can look to now in the future, of seeing someone that might look like them, that might be like them, who's youthful and young, and brings that promise for girls in the future. It's a momentous occasion to see that happen. But the day-to-day doesn't change anything. And yes, she went through the ringer, but then again, when you think about it, again, taking out the sound bites and the actual recordings of them going out and like Holly and Cruz and everybody, it's a job, it's a lifetime appointment. And to Roy's point, like, she's 51, early 50s. She easily could be there for 30 plus years now. And you think about Stephen Breyer being 82 or so right now. So it is a lifetime appointment. It is something that probably should be, in depth and have these 97 meetings with senators when you think that you're going in forever. So it's one of the only jobs you can think of that you go in and you're in for life. And there's really no opportunity for you to be removed. I mean, you could go in, we could talk about Clarence Thomas and being impeached and how difficult that'd be when you see all that. But so ostensibly you're going into this role for the rest of your life until you decide to retire. So it is a big undertaking, and but it is a momentous occasion again for young girls and young women across this country to see a Black woman get elevated, and someone who had such a great background as a public defender too, which also brings a little bit of uniqueness to the court as well. So that's also a plus, which, to Roy's point from earlier, that was part of the issues that Republicans had with her being a public defender and maybe being, in their opinion, too soft on crime. But yeah, it's a great victory for women.
Right. And Royal, just your perspective, sort of about her experience, less about her rulings, but the fact that this is the first time somebody brings that background, having been a public defender. What do you see as what could be the positives? And also, I'm sure that there could be cons to that as well, which, some of those 95 meetings clearly focused on. But what do you see as some of the positives of having for the first time someone who has that very specific experience heading to the Supreme Court?
Well, just in general, I mean, I think everybody is in agreement that there is strength in diversity. And when you think about the fact that other than Thurgood Marshall, who of course argued the Brown versus Board of Education case in the early 90s.
Oh, Royal definitely got frozen there.
Thurgood Marshall. Oh. Say again?
You froze for a second there. So you had mentioned Thurgood Marshall. Yeah.
Yeah. So my point was that he actually defended criminal defendants, and now she has represented criminal defendants. And I was kind of shocked to learn during all the run up and reading about this situation. Other than those two, there haven't been in recent decades any justices on the Supreme Court with that kind of experience. So in that.
Yeah. Well, I see that there's definitely a little bit of a lag, and for people that aren't here in the Valley in Southern California, not experiencing our near 100-degree weather, which is something that we're getting a lot of right now. We'll pop back into Royal in a little bit. But Scott, talk a little bit about sort of what you see as the positives, and what some of the legitimate concerns could be. We'll talk about the concerns that were maybe for political benefit, but talk about sort of both sides of what you see. Justice Jackson's appointment representing.
No, I think it's mainly a positive thing, and again, like Roy was saying earlier, it does not change the makeup of the court at this point. So it's still 6-3 with a conservative bent.
Yeah.
And it's positive again, like we said, to be able to see a Black woman justice be elevated here with the public defender background, which is important. That's part of our Constitution. That's one of our basic rights that's ingrained in the Constitution, that every single person is eligible to have a lawyer defend them, even if you cannot afford it. The whole saying is one will be provided for you, correct? And that's what she did for a long time. So she was working with, I don't want to say the worst of the worst, but criminals that came from terrible backgrounds, had horrible upbringings, all the most terrible things that could happen to a person. And then, a lot of times they fell into criminal activity and they're not able to defend themselves. This is where that comes in with being a public defender. And it's a challenging job. It's not the job you go into when you go to law school to become rich. Again, this is a public defender role. So this is something that you do to really give back to your community and to really go in there and work because it's something that you're passionate about. And again, not saying you're passionate about defending criminals, but passionate about that part of the Constitution, that everybody has a right to have a lawyer defend them. So it's the type of job that when you think about the character of a person, that says something, that you're not going into this career just for the bottom line, for the money and working at a fancy law firm. You're going in and really working in your community to make a difference. So having that background does help to color, I think, just to Royal's point earlier, too, the diversity. Not just the fact that she's a Black woman, but the fact that she was a public defender and has been on the other side of the courtroom, so to speak, and has had the opportunity to be able to defend criminals that wouldn't otherwise be able to have that defending, will also help color some of the judgments that are going to come across their docket in the future. And it is great to have this diversity and have this background in her back pocket there. So to me, it's a win-win. And the political points, of course, that's where they're going to be, where they're going to go after the soft of crime, the pedophile thing, because that's a Republican talking point, right? Is that Democrats have always been soft on crime, and Republicans are tough on crime. And so that's not really changing anything. And of course, they're going to want their sound bites because we're going into a midterm election here. But Republicans knew just as well. That's why they could do this, because she was going to be confirmed. So there was nothing they could do to stop that at this point.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that to Royal's point earlier, they knew that she would be confirmed, so they figured they would make as much of a production out of it as possible, and get as much mileage out of it. It's interesting, I guess, that it had to be noteworthy that there were 3 Republicans that voted for her. But I'm just I'm dealing with trying to help us reconnect with Royal. So hang on one second. But I'm trying to give him some advice. But we hope that we're able to get him back before too long. But and we're going to kind of go over some of the recent voting, and that there is a tendency recently for them to be very much along party lines, but there are also times in the past where that also happened, but we'll contrast and compare that. But the having people like Josh Hawley focus on these pedophile cases it's a very clear cause and effect, because that is of course, that's like sending up the bat signal with the big letter Q to some of his most ardent followers,
Right.
And I think that it's, he's really just trying to, and I think that anyone to say that, crimes of people charged with pedophilia in any way, shape, or form, whether it's just materials, whether it's actual behavior, those are all very serious crimes. But I don't think, I think it's fairly disingenuous. And Royal is back with us. And I think if we start to lose you again, maybe we'll click off the camera, but we hope that we're able to see you. But
good. I figured it was by popular demand I was disconnected.
Yeah. I don't think that was the case at all. If it was popular demand, it would just be you and Scott talking for the rest of the hour. So, not a popularity contest. But Scott, just sort of, I wanted to let, I'll kind of recap for Royal. I'm going to have Scott sort of recap how this, like you said, was, because of the makeup of the Senate, that, and we'll talk about the change where you just need a simple majority for a Supreme Court justice now, and that has been the case for a little while, that they figured we'll just make a show out of this, and we'll basically work on getting some snippets for midterm election ads, but specifically this idea about the being easy on pedophiles, which of course was Josh Hawley's, that's his bread and butter, because he knows that his butter is provided by the big letter Q. So Scott, what are your thoughts on all that?
Well, I mean, look, that we talked about this a bit earlier. Is it does now come down to sound bites and everything else that they can use, because it is the midterms, and so it's more of a show now than anything else, because we've seen it now. It's a simple majority, so you don't need to have ostensibly 10 Republicans come over to the other side. It's different than what it used to be with the real advice and consent of the Senate, because I know we're going to get into this, but when you look back even in the past 15, 20 years, you can see that a majority of the senators from both parties would go for a president's choice in the Supreme Court, because at one point in time it was, okay, this is the current president and they have a right to choose who they feel is best to have on the Supreme Court. So it used to be a very bipartisan thing through the years. And now, when everything started shifting in the past decade or so, when Harry Reid started it to get rid of it for the rest of the appellate judges and federal judges to a simple majority, and then Mitch McConnell went all the way there with that. And now you've seen that the Senate has also tightened in its makeup too. It used to be there were times where there was a supermajority of Democrats or Republicans. Even again back to a decade ago when Barack Obama was elected president, they had a supermajority of Democrats in the Senate. So it was easier to get things done with the filibuster, but now you're seeing a narrow makeup of the Senate, much like you see in the country where we're pretty much 50-50. And so that makeup has changed, that you're just not going to get as much done. But if you can get that 50+1 and get things through that way with a simple majority, this allows the opposition party to basically be able to showboat for all intents and purposes, to get their sound bites in there, to be able to have something to show people back at home. And also someone like Josh Hawley, who is going for the more extreme far right, who is, it's not any surprise there, has been a big Trump supporter and was big on the insurrection day back on January 6th. So he definitely is going after a very specific group of voters there. So he has to kind of go as extreme as possible. So absolutely, I mean, this is the opportunity for them to get all those great sound bites in there for their campaign ads and everything else this year.
Right. And Royal, when you have somebody like Ted Cruz making a lot of noise, you know that he is trying to solicit votes and support from people who don't like him, which by last count was almost everybody doesn't like him. But, just enough people in Texas will vote for him. But then when it comes to actual, popularity, it's like he's nobody's favorite senator. And that was your point earlier, though, Royal, was that they knew that this would get through, that they, even if not even a single Republican voted, that she would be confirmed. So let's make a big deal about this. What do you think that you overheard or read about that seemed like legitimate concerns from either party, and how much of it was really just like, all right, well, we're going to talk about how this is the most radical woman on the face of the earth, and we will say that she has no place on the Supreme Court, but we would probably be very cordial at a cocktail party somewhere someday?
Well, I don't think there were any legitimate substantive arguments or concerns that were raised about her. It was really amazing to see the questioning by Lindsey Graham. I mean, he came across as a very experienced, accomplished trial lawyer when he was questioning her about, well, tell us about your faith. How often do you go to church and so on? You're wondering, what the hell? What's he talking about? Why is he doing this? And then, of course, he made his point. He said, well, Dianne Feinstein was concerned that Amy Coney Barrett was, so Catholic, the dogma lives loudly within you. And he was trying to make the point that this is a double standard. You Democrats are going against Amy Coney Barrett. Well, then why can't we inquire as to matters of faith? And they asked her, can you define a woman? And Judge Jackson said, well, no, I'm not a biologist. Well, then they were able to make political points. She doesn't even know what a woman is. And, the whole idea about the Biden administration refusing to say pregnant women. Instead, they say pregnant people or birthing people. The idea being, well, what about transgenders? What about somebody who's born a woman, now identifies as a man, but physically he is able to give birth. And so that person wouldn't want to be known as a pregnant woman. So the Republicans were trying to use this forum of the Supreme Court nomination hearing to score points in the culture wars. And, it's kind of a shame that it's gotten to that point. In a way, though, I think the Democrats are a little less concerned, because remember months ago, they were just apoplectic, freaking out about the fact that, oh my gosh, we control the House, we control the Senate, we control the presidency, but we're thwarted at every turn because the Supreme Court has at least a 5-4 conservative majority. And if you take Chief Justice Roberts, who, although he famously saved Obamacare twice, but generally he's conservative, plug him in with that. Now you got 6. Now, that's because Trump got 3 justices appointed by total luck. Jimmy Carter also had 1 turn. He got 0 justices. So I think the Democrats were freaking out, saying, well, let's reform it. Let's put 15 people on the court. Let's have an age limitation and so on. Now, with the appointment of Judge Jackson, I think that'll take a little of the steam out of the need to have dramatic reforms, because I think it would be difficult to get those pushed through. So maybe, in a way, it'll sort of lower the temperature in Washington.
Right. Yeah. And I think, you referenced Lindsey Graham and the double standard. And it's, of course, worth noting that he previously voted to confirm her to a lower court. So she was all right for that. But
Yeah.
now all of a sudden everything's changed. And,
Right.
when I think that double standards are, it's not even worth applying to Lindsey Graham and, say Ted Cruz. You can find them saying anything about any issue and then also look not too deep and find the exact opposite. So it is a very political process. I agree with you. And I think so I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the numbers. This, as we mentioned, it was 53-47 at one point yesterday. It looked like it was going to be 53-46 because nobody knew where Rand Paul was. And they were just like, all right, well, where is he? And the Amy Coney Barrett voting, I think, had less to do with her than the fact that they railroaded it in the last month before an election of a president who ultimately was not reelected. And Brett Kavanaugh and Neil Gorsuch were fairly well divided. Elena Kagan, that came during Obama, that was 63-37. That seems, a little bit more normal. Sotomayor, 68-31. Alito was practically like we have right now, 58-42. John Roberts was the last one where it seemed like it was truly bipartisan. That was under George W. Bush. 78 yes, 22 no.
Landslide.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, but then Stephen Breyer. So I'm just going to go back to a couple more of these. Stephen Breyer was 87 yes, 9 no. The gold standard, of course, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, appointed by President Clinton, 96 yes, 3 no. Clarence Thomas was very much that was a very partisan moment. That's 52-48. But David Souter, 90 yes, 9 no. And then the last big one, Anthony Kennedy, appointed by Reagan, or nominated by Reagan, 97 to nothing. And then the last one on this list is Robert Bork, who had more no's than yeses and was not appointed to the Supreme Court.
I have a theory, Christian, as to why Anthony Kennedy was appointed unanimously. I think it's because the Democrats couldn't bring themselves to vote against a Kennedy.
I like that a lot.
Yeah.
I think you're absolutely correct.
Yes.
So the reason why I rattled all those off is that, yes, there are certainly instances scattered throughout, where it's almost 50-50, I mean, it's close enough to it. But you don't have to go back that far to have very clear bipartisan support. And the question is, I'll ask you first, Royal, do you think we will ever see that again? Or because there's only a simple majority required now, are we ever going to have any party having a super majority? Is it always going to be like 55 or maybe 59 in favor of one party, but we don't even get 60 for one party? It's going to usually be split down the middle. And then are these votes do you think, typically going to be more like this?
I think, sadly, we are in such a hyper-partisan era, and I think it's going to continue into the foreseeable future. One of the points I was making when I think the Russians hacked us 15 minutes ago and destroyed my connection was that it's sad to me that the court has come to be seen as a partisan thing. And I was starting to reference to the feud because between Chief Justice Roberts several years ago and President Trump, where Trump said, well, this is an Obama judge. He's Mexican and he doesn't like me because I'm hard on illegal immigrants. And Chief Justice Roberts normally doesn't feud publicly with the president, couldn't hold back. And he gave a speech and he said, there are no Obama judges and Bush judges. They're just hardworking federal judges. Well, that's a nice sentiment, but I don't think anybody really believes it anymore. We constantly refer not only to the Supreme Court justices, but also the appellate court judges and others as, they were appointed by Carter or they were appointed by Reagan, so we know how they are going to vote. And that's kind of sad because if there's, of course, in Congress and in the presidency, you got to be biased and everything's sort of partisan and hyper political, but you'd like to think that judges and justices making life and death decisions aren't in lockstep. But, I've kind of noticed over the last year, every single high profile case that comes out, whether it's affirmative action or abortion or guns or whatever, you look at the president who appointed the federal judge, whether it's the trial court, district court judge, or the appeals court judge, or the U.S. Supreme Court, and you can pretty much predict how they're going to vote. Well, do we really want that? I mean, if you or I have a court case and we're on trial for our life, do we really want the jurors to be voting based on their politics, or should they be voting based on the facts, the law, and this is fair? I would hope that we'd have that out of the bench as well, but we're to a point where I don't think we're really getting it. I think people on the bench are voting based on their politics. They were probably pretty hyper political before they got appointed to the bench. They feel loyalty to the president to put them there. So, yeah, short answer is I think it's going to be contentious for a long time, and it's kind of sad.
My apologies. I felt a sneeze coming on right as you were finishing, and I'm like, it's not going to go before Royal finishes. Yeah, and I think that this the simple fact really is that it is going to be sort of a partisan thing, which I think is unfair, sort of the perception that is, because, obviously you referenced Chief Justice Roberts voting very much not the way that Republicans would want him to vote. And even the recent Trump appointees, the three that he had, they certainly didn't vote the way that he would have wanted in a number of cases, and I think that
including his own cases,
including his own case,
right? That's what I was going to say. They were just like, and I'm sure the little bit we know of former President Trump, that he must have been like, the least you can do is look out for me. I made you
a little something for the effort.
Yeah, right, exactly. So Scott, do you feel like this is pretty much, at least for the foreseeable future, this is going to be a very partisan thing? Again, Amy Coney Barrett, the appointment, I think it's left Democrats, very upset because of the double standard that Mitch McConnell used, where he said he didn't want to, hold hearings on Neil Gorsuch during an election year, but then with, ballots had already been cast for the election, and then they have Barrett. So, but I, as we go through all those numbers, there really was, you see that trend. And do you figure that trend will continue, even if Biden doesn't get to a point anymore, even if there are no more vacancies for, say, 4, 8, even 10 years, you don't know how long it could take. Do you feel like whenever there are more nominees to the Supreme Court, it will be just as partisan as we've seen of late?
Oh, 100%. In fact, if not worse, because like Roy was saying, it's not just the fact that we are at a point where it's just simple majority. It's the fact that the country is very split. And, even back when we had more moderate judges and there was bipartisan support, and there were a lot of Supreme Court justices that were put on the court that were ideologically picked by a president, but they ended up over time either being the swing vote like Anthony Kennedy, or they ended up being more of a liberal, compared to like a conservative president picking them. So that happened a lot back, in the past generation, 20, 30 years ago, that you're just not seeing now, because it is completely partisan. And to Roy's point, it's like, pretty much how a judge or justice is going to vote depending on who pick them. And it's definitely going to be ongoing. We used to do a lot of ticket splitting where, you would vote for president of one party and you'd vote for senator in the other. And we've seen that go away as well over the past decade, 20 years, where essentially, I think it was only Susan Collins this past election in 2020, where you ticket split for a president different than the party of the senator. So you're definitely going to see that for sure. And it's going to continue on, unfortunately. And that's why I still think there should be a way of being able to lower the temperature, whether that's doing what we talked about, either keeping Supreme Court justices to less than a lifetime term. Maybe it's 18 years. Maybe it's something like that, to where you could lower the temperature a bit, where a president is always going to be able to select at least 1 or 2 justices. And then, it's an opportunity to hopefully bring down the temperature of not making this so partisan. So I do believe there still should be some kind of reform, because when the justices were picked for lifetime appointments 200 plus years ago, people were not living as long as they are now, and people were not working as long as they are now. So someone like Justice Kentanji Jackson, again, could easily be on the court well into her 80s, maybe even close to 90. And same thing with Amy Coney Barrett. She was in her late 40s, I believe. And so when you have someone that can be on the court for 40 plus 50 years, I mean, that does get to be a point where it's like, maybe we should look into finding ways of making it a little bit better to say, okay, at some point we do need to have justices retire. We do need to have some fresh people in there. And again, if a president is able to pick one in their term, that would help hopefully lower the temperature of it being so partisan.
Right. Royal, as recently as yesterday, Mitch McConnell, whom Scott tweets at regularly. It's been a while, but you
It
have.
has been.
But Mitch McConnell wouldn't commit to whether or not, if there were more vacancies during Biden's administration and Republicans were to become the majority again, he wouldn't commit one way or the other. He didn't really want to comment on whether or not they would actually hold hearings. And I would take that to mean that if it is a Democratic president and a Republican Senate, they will not hold hearings. But once you set that precedent, much like lowering the threshold to a simple majority, then does that mean that any time that the Senate is controlled by a different party, no one will get to replace a Supreme Court justice? And then if, say, Mitch McConnell follows through on that, you'll just end up with an even number of justices, because as we've seen, usually you replace a Supreme Court justice when the previous one passes away, not because they step down and then they're going to still work for 4 more months.
Right.
So what do you think about this approach that, again, Mitch McConnell didn't say, but it's very easy to read between the lines with that guy?
Yeah, I think what's happening is that we're seeing Mitch McConnell emerge over the last several years as a real player, a real political tactician. And of course, half the country absolutely hates him, half the country loves him. But the fact is, he got the job done in the same way Ted Kennedy got the job done in the 80s when Judge Bork went up for the Supreme Court. Kennedy was able to say, Judge Bork's America is where women are forced to have back alley coat hanger abortions. Judge Bork's America is where we will have segregated lunch counters. Now, you can attack it for being hyperbole, but the fact is it worked. And we see Senator McConnell succeeding in this. So I think, yeah, he's going to leave his options open. And whatever happens in terms of the Republicans maybe taking the Senate back, and then Biden's got another couple of years, you can bet that unless it's so transparently hypocritical and totally wrong that the country will rise up and say, no, we hate you, Mitch McConnell, we're voting against every Republican. Unless it gets to that point, he's going to keep wheeling and dealing. And of course, a lot of people are comparing Schumer and saying, hey, we love you, Chuck, but you're, when it comes to playing chess like Gary Kasparov or Bobby Fischer, you're no Mitch McConnell. On the point about the age, I saw a recent show called Years and Years, and it's a futurist thing about what's life going to be like 20, 30 years. And they're actually talking about uploading the contents of your brain to the cloud. So your physical body's gone, but actually you still. So maybe in 30 or 40 years, we'll have the Supreme Court justices at age 120, and they'll rule from the cloud. I'm not saying it's going to happen. It's just a possibility.
No, it's a possibility. Look, and I'll be able to keep doing my podcast for at least 50 more years. But yeah, no, and I think that it's I guess that is a good point, the comparison with Schumer. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like at some point. And by the way, I know what I was going to ask. Sorry, I had thought of this before. If this is a hypothetical, if the Senate had been divided 50-50 on a Supreme Court confirmation, does the vice president get to cast a vote, a tiebreaker vote on something even as consequential as the Supreme Court? Scott's nodding his head. Yes.
Yep, that's correct.
So if for some reason they hadn't gotten a single Republican to vote, and as we know, there were 3, right, they still would have been able to because Kamala Harris would have won. And I mean, obviously, you can see the optics were very good for what President Biden. Look, people make a lot of campaign promises. He did promise that he would appoint a Black woman to the Supreme Court. He did do that, and she did get confirmed. And you did have the first female and the first African-American vice president presiding over it. What I'm wondering, Royal, your thoughts are not so much how the Republicans voted, but that other apart from the 3 who voted in favor, the other 47 made the big show to stand up and walk out of the chamber while everyone was applauding. So basically they're saying, like, not only do we vote no, we are taking the ball and we are going home and we will not play your game anymore. Good day, sir. I feel like just the visual of that, it's going to carry favor with people who are going to vote for them anyway. And all it really does is turn off people like, all Republicans aren't racist, but you can say it when they do this. You know what I'm saying, Royal?
Sure.
Like, I feel like that's more damaging than how they voted, is the fact that it's like, we're going to leave. We don't want to be here anymore, you know?
No, I think you're right. There was a risk from the get-go that Republicans who opposed Judge Jackson would be portrayed as racist and would pay the price at the ballot box. I think one thing that maybe is going on politically is Republicans feel a little emboldened by the polls, not only in general, but with respect to demographic groups. Latino voters seem to be tilting more for the Republicans. The Black vote, in some polls, instead of being 90%-ish for Democrats, closer to 70%. So maybe Republicans feel like, we can flex our muscles and so on. But I think you're gonna pay a certain price if you seem disrespectful, and it does border on racist. The point you raised a minute ago was interesting, Christian, about Kamala Harris's role, and as Scott was nodding, and I was thinking the same thing. Yeah, it's not a matter of, is this a really huge, crucial thing? It's always the case that the VP gets right to break the 50-50 tie. But there was a little twist. For a few weeks, there was some thinking before Jackson's name was put in by the president that maybe the president would appoint Kamala Harris as the next Black female justice of the Supreme Court. And then some people were spinning out weird possibilities like, well, what if it's 50-50? Does she get to cast the tie-breaking vote to put herself on the Supreme Court, which would have seemed a little wrong. But of course, he didn't go that route. But some people who are into the whole, the Biden people hate Kamala Harris and she really hasn't done such a terrific job. Wouldn't it be swell for Biden to be able to put Pete Buttigieg on the ticket with him for 2024, put Kamala Harris on the shelf on the Supreme Court? I mean, that's a wonderful promotion. It's not like it's some horrible thing he's doing to her, but it didn't happen.
Yeah. No, I know. And honestly, it is one of those things that when you are a big, political junkie, or you might even say political nerd, there's always, every election year, you always have people that drop the map. It's like, well, here's the 268 deadlocked electoral college. Right. So you always have people that are like, hey, but what about the what if? And I mean, it is always interesting. It's like, and I will cast a deciding vote for me. And but as you said, that didn't happen. Keith's dad, we're always happy to see you in the chat. The only thing that bothers me today is that it's less about whether it's right or wrong, but more about if it helps their own party. I agree. That's really what politicians feel that their jobs are. And I would hope that everyone on the Supreme Court does think about, yes, they're going to have their worldview, which is shaped in a specific way. And that's why they were appointed by the president they were. But I'm encouraged when you see a justice vote in a way that is not what you would expect, because that tells me that they considered the law, which they're there to represent, and they felt like the law led them in this other direction. And I wonder if that's part of the reason why Justice to be Jackson Brown, Kentanji Jackson Brown. Jackson Brown makes it sound like the singer. As soon as I said that, I'm like, that's confusing. Let's hold the confirmation hearings on Jackson Brown, the singer, to see if he can sit on the Supreme Court. But the getting put on the spot to be like, well, define a woman, is like, I can't say something like that on record because I don't know what kind of case I'm going to hear in the future. I don't want there to be like, well, you said this. And, I mean, it's the ultimate gotcha check question, because like, well, what do you think is a woman? I'm like, you asked me that 20 years ago, there's an answer. You ask me that 20 months ago, there might be a different answer. And now it's like, well, I don't really know. It's really going to depend on the situation, case by case, as it was. I wanted to talk about one more thing in relation to the Supreme Court, because it is our Supreme Court special. There was some question about Clarence Thomas's health recently, because he went to the hospital, and it's a very interesting thing that the media does when something like that happens, because they try to be responsible, but you can tell that the way that it's phrased, either a certain outlet is excited at the prospect that maybe someone's not feeling well and they might have to set down, and then another outlet is like really nervous, like, oh, let's wrap him in a big plastic bubble. It's something that people said a lot, even on this show. People said about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, going back a number of years. What do you think about that? I'll ask you first, Scott. Sort of the idea of, like, I mean, and he was just sick. I think early people thought maybe he had COVID, or maybe, I don't actually know what was wrong with him. I think that they didn't disclose it. But what do you think about sort of the nervousness / the giddiness when you hear that another human is not feeling well, Scott?
I know, and that's the thing. It goes back to this cutthroat political world we're at, where everything's divided 50-50 and everything's looked at through a partisan lens. And to your point, it was exactly that with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And then the worst did occur. She passed away, and then she was replaced by a far right, ostensibly conservative judge. So it does come up where you take out the humanity from this, and it becomes a blood sport, and anything of any kind of human connection is lost there. But yeah, it's a sign of the times, and we were saying this earlier, it's just going to continue to get worse, because you can have smaller and smaller echo chambers that fit your exact worldview now, as opposed to what we had 30 years ago, 40 years ago, when you had limited, before Fox News and before far right talk radio, and before now podcasts and other things, to where you never have to interact with someone who's different from you. You can keep yourself in, speaking of a bubble, in your own little bubble, and only interact with the people you want to interact with, and never have to really leave your house or your immediate area. And it is a detriment, because it does change people's worldviews, where we used to have to go out in the world, and we used to have to see opposing viewpoints and see people we didn't necessarily agree with, and be able to find a way to compromise. And now compromise is a bad word and a bad thing. It's basically essentially saying, you're losing if you're compromising. And so we have lost that humanity a bit when we've been able to just sit, even with us, we're not in a studio anymore next to each other. We're now in 3 separate locations. And it does affect sort of your ability to deal with any kind of things you don't want to have to deal with now. I can just click this off and disappear right now if I didn't agree with what you were saying. So it's different, than what it used to be, where I would have to sit in the studio with you. We'd have to listen to opposing viewpoints, and you couldn't just really, you could get up and walk away, but you know what I'm saying? You couldn't just leave and never have to deal with someone you didn't agree with.
It's a lot easier, which begs the question as to what Royal got so upset about earlier that we lost the connection. And Royal, I want to ask you the same question, but I want to make a great point that all credit to our friend Storage Yard Resident, who never misses an episode, even though I don't know if he agrees with anything we ever say. And he's been talking in the chat. President Trump always puts on a good show. Tens of thousands of people go to them every time he holds one. He is always telling us about these great rallies that President Trump holds. And I give all the credit to Storage Yard Resident for never missing a show, and he's always just telling us what he thinks. There are people that in the chat that can be very, first of all, they can be very rude, they can be very confrontational, but he just has a different point of view, and he likes us for some reason. So thank you, Storage Yard Resident, and I gave you credit for your fact in there. And but Royal, really the same question, just sort of the hyper-partisan nature of, about half the country gets excited when they hear that an old man who has served his country is not feeling well.
Yeah, I totally agree with Scott's point. And it's so sad, because, you're always going to have evil people who don't really have any compassion for other folks. It's probably worse now because of our hyper-partisan era. But, we saw it with respect to Trump, when Robert Trump, the president's brother, died a few years ago. There were all sorts of tweets about, well, the wrong Trump died. Yeah. And so now we come along, and Clarence Thomas, I saw a lot of samples of the social media response. Whoa. People came out, a lot of comedians, so maybe they were sort of half joking, but some non-comedians as well, basically came out and saying, come on, folks, let's be realistic. Let's admit it to ourselves. We're hoping he dies. Because as you pointed out, Christian, we didn't know it wasn't COVID necessarily. They called it an infection, but he was in the hospital. So people just blatantly, openly rooting for him to die. But, I think it's on both sides. you think of Hillary and Nancy Pelosi, you know that there are a lot of people out on the fringe on the right who would just love it if they picked up the paper tomorrow and found out that Hillary or Nancy Pelosi died. And of course, now we know that Nancy Pelosi has COVID. By the way,
Yeah.
I heard she had a comorbidity. Apparently, if the percentage of plastic in your bloodstream is over 20%, that is a comorbidity. But anyway, it's
so
just
what you're
sad.
saying, is that Botox does not fight off COVID-19. Is that the science experiment that we can draw?
Yeah,
from
I
this?
think that's what it boils down to. And it's pretty sad. I mean, and when you think about Joe Biden getting a lot of crap for saying, "Hey, you know, I used to hands across the aisle. I used to deal with guys that I didn't agree with on basic issues," and people were pushing back and saying, "Well, you're talking about some evil segregationists, and you actually said hello to them in the Senate cloakroom." And Biden's attitude was, well, yeah, we had to get along. We compromised, and we did a lot of good stuff by not, just hating each other and glaring at each other. But I think we're past that. We're now into the total glare mode.
Right, exactly. And
Yeah.
I think if anybody watching or listening to us thinks about times where they've hoped that someone might pass away, you should ask yourself, what's your motivation? Were you, did you not shed a tear when Jeffrey Epstein died? That's probably okay. There are times where you can see it and it makes sense. Before we run out of time, I do want to continue talking about Justice Thomas, though, and has less to do with him and with his wife, Ginny Thomas, who I think that before this, I don't think I realized she ran this consulting company that could create some conflicts of interest. And it's not so much that company, but it's the fact that there were texts that she sent to Mark Meadows, who at that point was then President Trump's chief of staff, texting and encouraging him to do whatever they can to overturn the results of the 2020 election. I want to first ask you, Royal, from the legal standpoint, when you hear about this story, what is your first concern? And as you heard how it played out, what are your just overall thoughts on it?
So it's a thorny issue. There are canons of judicial ethics. There are rules that judges have to follow. And for example, if a judge has shares of IBM stock and all of a sudden it's Christian Bladt versus IBM before Judge Smith, he's got to recuse himself because, or if his spouse owns the stock. So that's a clear rule. But then it gets kind of murky. If the judge has a spouse who's a real activist, there are no rules and there are no precedents that say, hey, the judge has to back off because the spouse is super active and she's totally involved in it. And as a good example, the most liberal member of the most liberal circuit, Ninth Circuit, was Stephen Reinhardt for years. And his wife was a woman you may have bumped into. I've bumped into her on a lot of shows. Ramona Ripston was executive director of the ACLU for a long time. And she was totally into every single hot button issue that would then go before the Ninth Circuit and then the U.S. Supreme Court. But nobody said, oh, Stephen Reinhardt has to recuse himself. And I think the same thing applies to Ginny Thomas. She's a super activist on abortion and affirmative action and so on. And so that isn't a reason for him to back off, except to the extent she veers close to being almost like a witness. So when she's texting with Mark Meadows and involved in the, stop the steal and so on, if she gets that close to it, then she's not just the head of an activist group, but she's almost like a witness, in which case he ought to think and say, I better back off of this case.
Yeah, no, and I think that obviously, partnerships and marriages are not built on everyone agreeing on everything. And I always liked the pairing of James Carville and Marley Matlin, not Marley
Right.
Matlin, but yeah, and just because of the idea of like, boy, they so actively worked against each other in an election, and they would just go on talk shows together, and I always found them entertaining together. But but what did you think when you heard about this, Scott? Concerns about her activism, and the hope would be that Justice Thomas's, those are my wife's views. My first duty is to the law, and obviously she's my wife and I love her, but that doesn't mean that it's going to influence my decision. But what are your overall thoughts on this story as it played out?
Well, I mean, to Royal's point, that is it. It's like she's right on that edge of being involved in this case. And to that point, when you saw Justice Thomas was the only one who dissented from allowing those records to go out. It was 8-1, and he was the lone dissenter. That's where you start. And I think that's where people have the concern, like, oh, wait a minute, maybe he was concerned that something would pop up. Case in point, with her texting back and forth to Mark Meadows, other things would pop up that would show her more actively involved in this. And so that to me is the difference is, yes, I could see, having a spouse have their own rights as a private citizen to be involved. And yes, she has her own rights to her beliefs, as off as they may be to the mainstream or whatever. That's her right as an American citizen. But where it starts to cross the line is where she is intimately involved, when she's talking to the White House, to the president's chief of staff, when there's texting going on, when there's communication going on, and where you saw Justice Thomas have the lone dissenting vote with all the other conservative justices to say, does not release those records to the January 6th committee. And so you put that stuff together and you think, well, this might be an actual legitimate conflict of interest compared to some of the previous judges and justices with their spouses and what they're involved with. Because as we said, they have a right to do that in their private time as a private citizen. But in this case, there does seem to be a bit more of an edging to a legit conflict of interest here, to where he should be looking into, recusing himself.
Right.
I have a test I'd like to propose, Christian, for when
Yes.
he should recuse himself. If his dissent consists of, I dissent, happy wife, happy life, that's it.
Yeah,
He should have recused himself.
Right. Yeah. And that was basically what I was wondering, because it's not impossible that the Supreme Court could, be faced with cases on January 6th. And because of the public knowledge of this now, it would be very difficult for him not to. And even Justice to be Brown, we know that there's going to be something the Supreme Court will hear with regards to Harvard that she's already said she would plan to recuse herself from because of the conflict of interest. So we understand that these things happen, but I can see the concern. And are you personally concerned, Royal, that Clarence Thomas wouldn't recuse himself in a case that perhaps he should, or do you in your heart feel like you would at least hope that he would do the right thing?
Oh, I think he should recuse himself if it's a dispute where his wife is so intimately involved that she isn't just, let's lead the charge, but personally was, communicating with folks. So hopefully he'll do that. The problem is they police themselves. The Supreme Court doesn't have anybody above them saying, hey, you should have recused yourself. Every other judge, there are people above them who can second guess them. But unless the court is prepared to just come after their fellow justice with torches and pitchforks, he's going to do what he wants.
So maybe that we need a review panel for the Supreme Court with only one judge on it, the only important judge of the land, Judge Judy. She will take a look at what everybody else says, and she'll feel whether or not it passes the muster. Well, we did end up talking about the Supreme Court for the whole show, but I think it's very much in the news lately, and it'll be sort of very interesting to see where how this court rules. There is still going to be the conservative majority, as we established. The rulings themselves, I don't think the actual votes, the numbers won't change, I think, at all. But it'll be interesting to see sort of how this plays out. Royal, thank you as always for whenever you're on. We always appreciate it. Please take a moment and let everybody know where they can find some of the fun things you're working on.
Oh, sure. Just Facebook and Twitter. At Royal Oaks, and just trying to keep on top of most of the high-profile cases these days. There's no shortage of them. And you can visit my website, royaloaks.com. And our podcast, my son Connor and I do a podcast called Too Many Lawyers, and it drops every Wednesday. So just wherever you get your favorite shows, go check out Too Many Lawyers.
And Scott, as it says on the screen, people can find you at SMan80. And
right.
Are you sure that you don't have it in you to start tweeting at Mitch McConnell anytime? I miss those. I really miss those tweets.
I think so. I think I could find the time again to do
it. Yeah, he's said a couple things in the last week that you might want to comment on.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, and as always, I'm at Christian DMZ, Twitter and Instagram. Please subscribe to the Blackcast YouTube channel. I know that there's a very fluid schedule for this show, but especially when we have things like a Supreme Court confirmation and the State of the Union, we want to kind of move the show to a more relevant day. But we'll be back in a couple weeks, so please subscribe, and then you'll know when we're coming back. And I want to end on this. Keith's dad, great show. Storage Yard Resident, almost as great as a Trump rally. I love you, Storage Yard Resident, and I can't wait to see you for our next episode. Thanks again, everybody, and we will talk to you soon.